Just 3 months back, I was settled into a $4.2 million home in California with my family. Right now, I'm gripping a letter that's blown apart everything I thought I knew about my existence, and the woman who tore my world apart may have actually rescued me without realizing it. I go by Thaddeus Pembroke, age 47. Up until not long ago, I made my living as a commercial insurance adjuster working out of San Bernardino, essentially spending my workdays assessing other people's catastrophes and assisting them with putting the pieces back together. My life looked like what most folks would consider the classic American success story. I had a stunning wife, Isolde, who'd been my partner for 18 years of marriage. Our twin children, Alaric and Seren, were 16 and 14 respectively, incredibly bright kids who meant absolutely everything to me. Our residence was this spectacular property situated in the hills, with a panoramic view of the entire metropolitan area stretching out beneath us like a sea of lights. I believed I had a complete understanding of my own identity. My understanding was that I was Thaddeus Pembroke, the son of Marguerite Pembroke, a reserved librarian who raised me single-handedly following my father's fatal car crash when I reached 12 years old. According to what I'd always been told, my dad was simply an ordinary working man employed in construction who passed away far too young, leaving my mother to navigate raising a son on a librarian's income. Our circumstances growing up in Toledo weren't affluent, but my mother consistently ensured I had everything essential. She possessed this remarkable quality of remembering every single person's birthday, maintaining meticulously organized photo collections sorted by year, and making certain I consumed my vegetables and completed my schoolwork. Isolde had been my romantic partner since high school days. Our paths crossed when I was 17 and she was 16, and we experienced that intense teenage love where you commit everything you have. She carried herself with ambition and beauty, possessing the kind of presence that could dominate a room effortlessly. Following college, she pursued real estate and demonstrated exceptional talent in that field. We constructed this existence together gradually, one piece at a time, advancing through the years. The children arrived, we relocated to California seeking enhanced opportunities, acquired the dream residence, and enrolled Alaric and Seren in private educational institutions. Alaric emerged as our athletic standout, standing 6 feet 2 inches with a physique that supposedly resembled his grandfather, though I never really knew my father well enough to confirm that comparison. He competed on the varsity basketball squad, already attracting attention from college scouts despite only being a sophomore. Seren represented the artistic soul of our household, similar to how my mother had been in her understated manner. She possessed the ability to sketch anything and viewed the world through a lens that made others pause and truly observe things from a fresh perspective. For 47 years, this narrative defined who I was. This identity shaped my entire understanding of myself as Thaddeus Pembroke, devoted family man, insurance professional, former Toledo resident who achieved success in California. I possessed zero reasons to question any aspect of it. Then my entire reality started crumbling apart. The deterioration began roughly 18 months prior with minor indicators. Isolde started receiving phone calls and would excuse herself to take them privately outside. Her work hours extended later and later, with explanations about new clients and larger transactions. The way she looked at me transformed, as though I'd become an unfamiliar person she was attempting to understand. The warmth we'd maintained for nearly 20 years began diminishing incrementally until I felt like I was cohabiting with someone who could barely stand my presence. Our children detected the change as well. Alaric would question me about why their mother appeared constantly upset. Seren began isolating herself more frequently in her bedroom, creating darker artwork, portraits depicting families that appeared damaged, even when they were smiling. I kept convincing myself this was temporary, perhaps early midlife challenges, possibly work-related pressure. I attempted communicating with Isolde, organizing romantic evenings together, trying every approach I could conceive to reconnect with the woman I'd cherished since adolescence. None of my efforts produced results. If anything, my attempts appeared to increase her distance and hostility. Then the divorce documentation arrived, Not simply divorce papers, but a comprehensive assault on everything I believed constituted my identity. Based on what Isolda's attorney presented, I was apparently a gambling addict who'd been concealing enormous debts. I was portrayed as financially reckless, potentially hazardous, definitely unsuitable for maintaining custody of our children. They produced bank records displaying transactions I'd never conducted, casino documentation bearing my signature that I'd never signed, testimony from individuals claiming I'd borrowed funds and failed to repay them. Absolutely none of it reflected reality, not a single element. Yet somehow they possessed documentation supporting all these claims. The courtroom experience was absolutely nightmarish. I sat there observing my entire existence being dismantled by attorneys who discussed me as though I were some kind of criminal. My own spouse, the mother of my children, the woman I'd shared a bed with for 18 years, wouldn't even make eye contact with me. When the judge granted Isolda everything including the house, primary custody, and even my business holdings, I experienced something fracturing inside my chest. However, the most devastating moment occurred afterward, outside the courthouse building. Isolda approached me wearing this expression I'd never witnessed before, frigid and satisfied. She leaned in closely and whispered that I'd never see Alaric and Serene again, that she was relocating them to Eugene the following month, and I lacked the financial resources to challenge her anymore. That's when I understood this wasn't simply a marriage dissolving. This represented something entirely different, something calculated and merciless that I couldn't comprehend. Within 6 weeks, I'd forfeited my house, my children, and even my insurance license due to the fabricated financial misconduct accusations. I had nowhere to turn except returning to Toledo, to my mother's residence that had remained vacant since her death 2 years earlier. So I loaded whatever remained of my existence into my Honda Civic and traveled 1,200 miles to a location I hadn't inhabited since reaching 18 years old. That's where this account truly commences. The journey from California to Toledo consumed 3 days, and every mile felt like traveling backward through time. When I finally pulled into the driveway of my mother's house on Birchwood Street in Toledo, I felt like a ghost returning to haunt my own history. The house appeared precisely as it had during my mother's funeral 2 years prior. Small, tidy, representing that quintessential 1960s ranch home that epitomized middle-class America, back when that designation actually carried meaning. White exterior siding, black shutters, a front porch just large enough for 2 chairs and a small table where my mother would sit every evening with her tea and whatever book she was currently reading from the library. I remained in the car for an extended period before I could compel myself to enter. This was intended to be temporary, simply a location to regroup while I determined how to reclaim my life. But sitting there observing that modest little house, I couldn't avoid thinking about how dramatically I'd fallen. 3 months earlier, I could observe downtown Los Angeles from my bedroom window. Now I was looking at Mrs. Whitmore's garden decorations across the street. My mother, Marguerite Pembroke, had resided in this house for 35 years. She purchased it when I was 12, immediately following my father's death, utilizing his life insurance payment and whatever modest savings they'd managed to accumulate. It was the type of purchase that symbolized optimism more than practicality. A single mother with a librarian's income accepting a mortgage because she believed her son deserved a backyard and his own bedroom. My mother was the most quietly resilient person I'd ever encountered. She never remarried following my father's death, never even pursued romantic relationships as far as I could determine. She dedicated herself entirely to raising me and her employment at the downtown branch of the Toledo Public Library. Every morning, she'd prepare my breakfast and pack my lunch, then walk the 6 blocks to work, carrying her own lunch in a brown paper bag. Every evening, she'd return home with a stack of books under her arm, some for work, some for personal enjoyment, some because she thought I might appreciate them. She possessed this ability to make our modest existence feel abundant and complete. We lacked money for elaborate vacations, so she'd manufacture adventures in our own backyard. We'd erect the tent and camp outside under the stars, and she'd share stories about constellations while we shared a thermos of hot chocolate. When I developed interest in model airplanes, she worked additional hours at the library to purchase kits for me. then sat with me at the kitchen table assisting me with painting the tiny details, despite her vision not being optimal. What I recall most vividly about my mother was her quiet certainty about everything. She always knew precisely how much money we possessed, exactly when bills required payment, exactly what I needed before I recognized the need myself. For a woman who'd been widowed young and left to raise a child independently, she never appeared worried or overwhelmed. She simply managed whatever needed managing with this calm competence that made me feel secure in a way I didn't fully appreciate until I became a parent myself. The peculiar thing was we always seemed to have precisely enough money. Never abundance, but never the desperate shortage you'd anticipate from a single mother's librarian salary. When I needed school clothing, there was money for school clothing. When the car malfunctioned, she had it repaired. When I wanted to attend college, she somehow made that possible too, though she never clarified exactly how she'd managed to save sufficiently. I questioned her about it once when I was in my 20s, newly married to Isolde, and beginning to comprehend how expensive life could be. I asked how she managed it, how she managed to provide me with everything I needed on what the library compensated her. She simply smiled that quiet smile of hers and said, "You discover a way when someone you love depends on you. That's what parents do." Now, unlocking the front door and stepping into her house for the first time since the funeral, I could detect her presence everywhere. That combination of lavender soap and aged books that had always signified home to me. The furniture remained exactly where she'd positioned it. Her reading glasses still rested on the end table beside her favorite chair. The final book she'd been reading, a mystery novel about a librarian who solves crimes, lay open on the coffee table with a bookmark still indicating her place. Walking through those familiar rooms, I felt the weight of everything I'd lost pressing down on me like a physical force. My kids were 1,000 miles distant, probably being told terrible things about their father. My wife had become a stranger who seemed to despise me with an intensity I couldn't comprehend. My career was destroyed, my reputation in ruins, my bank account empty. But standing in my mother's living room surrounded by her books and her photographs, and the quiet dignity of the life she'd constructed for us, I made a decision. This house was the single thing Isolde's lawyers couldn't confiscate from me. It belonged to me now, completely paid off. A gift from a woman who'd spent her entire adult life ensuring I had something solid to stand on. I'd renovate it, sell it, and use every penny to fight for my children. It seemed like a sound plan. I had absolutely no idea I was about to discover that my mother had left me something far more valuable than real estate. The renovation work began several weeks after I'd settled into the house. I needed to maximize the sale value, and that meant addressing years of deferred maintenance. I tackled the project room by room, stripping wallpaper, refinishing floors, updating fixtures. The physical labor felt therapeutic after months of feeling powerless in legal proceedings. The basement was the final area I addressed. My mother had utilized it primarily for storage, and it was filled with decades of accumulated belongings. Boxes of Christmas decorations, vintage photo albums, my elementary school projects that she'd preserved for sentimental reasons. Sorting through her possessions was emotional, but also strangely comforting. It reminded me of my authentic identity, my origins, the woman who'd raised me to be honest and hardworking and decent. That's when I observed something unusual about the furnace area. The basement featured a corner where the old oil furnace was positioned, converted to gas sometime during the 1990s, but never relocated from its original spot. But the concrete floor surrounding it appeared different than the rest of the basement. There were scratch marks that appeared recent, and when I knelt down to examine them more carefully, I could observe that dust had accumulated in patterns that didn't quite make sense. It appeared as though the furnace had been moved, and recently. That seemed impossible. My mother had been deceased for 2 years, and before that, she'd been too frail to move anything heavier than a book. The furnace had to weigh several hundred pounds. There was no conceivable way she could have moved it independently, and I couldn't think of any reason why she would have wanted to, but the evidence was right there before me. I spent the better part of an afternoon determining how to move that thing. I had to disconnect the gas line, which terrified me, and use a furniture dolly and considerable leverage to shift it approximately 3 feet from the wall. My back was protesting by the time I accomplished it, but it was worthwhile. Behind the furnace, embedded into the concrete wall at roughly shoulder height, was a small safe I'd never known existed. It was one of those old-fashioned combination safes, perhaps 18 inches square, painted the same gray as the basement walls so it would blend in. The metal was worn smooth in places, like it had been opened numerous times over numerous years. There was no brand name visible, nothing to indicate how old it was or where it originated from. I stared at that safe for probably 20 minutes, my mind racing. How long had it been there? Why had my mother never mentioned it? What was inside it that was important enough to conceal behind a furnace? The combination lock featured numbers from 0 to 99. That meant 10,000 possible combinations, which could take forever to crack. But as I stood there looking at it, something my mother used to do returned to me. Every year on my birthday, March 15th, she'd call me at exactly 7:23 in the morning. Not 7:30, not 7:15, but 7:23 precisely. She'd always stated it was because that was the exact time I was born, and she wanted to celebrate the precise moment I entered the world. March 15th, 1977. My hands were trembling as I turned the dial, right to 03, left to 15, right to 77. For a moment nothing occurred. Then I heard a soft click and the heavy door swung open. What I discovered inside transformed everything I thought I knew about my life. The safe was deeper than it appeared from the outside, and it was packed full. The first thing I observed was money, more cash than I'd ever seen in one place. Stacks of $100 bills bound with rubber bands, some of them aged and yellowed, others crisp and new. My hands trembled as I pulled them out, counting as I proceeded. $847,000 to be exact. Beneath the money were documents, multiple driver's licenses, all with my mother's photograph, but different names. Esperanza Villarreal from New Mexico, Celestina Navarro from Arizona, Rowena Fitzgerald from Nevada. The photographs displayed my mother at different ages, but it was definitely her. Younger versions of the quiet librarian who'd raised me, but with something harder in her eyes, something watchful that I'd never noticed when she was alive. There were Social Security cards corresponding to the licenses, birth certificates, even a passport for Esperanza Villarreal dated 1988. All of them appeared completely authentic. Not like forgeries, but like official government documents. My mother, Marguerite Pembroke, had apparently been existing under multiple identities for decades. At the very bottom of the safe was a sealed envelope with my name written on it in my mother's careful handwriting. My actual name, not some alias, just Thaddeus in the script I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists my entire life. I sat down hard on the basement floor and tore open the envelope. Inside were 3 pages of my mother's handwriting, and the opening line made my blood freeze in my veins. My dearest Thaddeus, if you're reading this, they finally found you, and I'm no longer here to protect you. The letter proceeded to destroy everything I'd believed about my life. Your actual name is Thaddeus Volante. Your father didn't perish in a car accident when you were 12. His name was Domenico Volante, and he was murdered by the Graziano crime family in Chicago on September 18, 1989. I witnessed his murder because I was supposed to die with him. Instead, I ran. I took you and I ran, and 3 months later, I testified against the men who killed your father before a federal grand jury. I had to stop reading for a moment. My hands were shaking so severely I could barely hold the paper. Domenico Volante, not Domenico Pembroke, construction worker who died in a traffic accident, but Domenico Volante, who was murdered by organized crime. And my mother hadn't simply been a widow trying to survive financially. She'd been a witness in a federal case. The letter continued. We entered the Witness Protection Program in January 1990. I became Marguerite Pembroke, you became Thaddeus Pembroke, and we relocated to Toledo to start over. The government provided us new identities, a modest settlement to help us establish our new lives, and the promise that we'd be safe as long as we never contacted anyone from our old life or revealed who we really were. Everything started making sense, the way my mother always seemed to have just enough money despite her librarian's salary, her reluctance to discuss our life before Toledo, the way she'd taught me never to trust strangers too quickly, never to reveal too much personal information, always to be aware of my surroundings. I thought she was simply being protective. She'd been keeping us alive. The money in this safe represents what remains of our government settlement, plus money I saved over the years by living carefully. But Thaddeus, there's something else you need to know. Something I discovered too late to warn you properly. My heart was pounding so intensely I could hear it in my ears. I hired private investigators to monitor you in California starting 3 years ago, not because I didn't trust you, but because I'd heard rumors that people were asking questions about the Volante family again. What they discovered broke my heart. Your wife Isolde has been working with people who've been searching for us for decades. They found you first, and they used her to get close to you. The room started spinning around me. Isolde, my high school sweetheart, the mother of my children, the woman I'd loved for 20 years, had been working with the people who killed my father. I don't know if she understood what she was really involved in, or if they manipulated her the same way they tried to manipulate you. But the divorce proceedings, the false evidence about gambling, all of it was designed to break you financially and emotionally, so you'd have nowhere to go except back to Toledo. They wanted to force you to come here, to the one place where they knew I might have left something that could lead them to other witnesses or evidence from the original case. I felt nauseated. Every terrible thing that had happened to me over the past year, losing my house, my kids, my reputation, all of it had been orchestrated by people who'd been hunting my family for over 30 years. But my mother hadn't simply left me money and the truth. She'd left me a way to fight back. There's a phone number at the bottom of this letter. Call Marshal Leander Croft with the United States Marshal Service. He's been waiting for this call since the day I died. Tell him you're Domenico Volante's son, and tell him you're ready to finish what we started. The number was written in red ink, underlined 3 times. Below it, my mother had written one final message. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth while I was alive. I wanted to give you a normal life, a chance to be happy without looking over your shoulder every day. But I always knew this day might come. You are stronger than you know, Thaddeus. You come from a long line of people who don't back down from fights, even when the odds are against them. Your father would be proud of the man you've become. I know I am. Use the money wisely, get your children back, and remember that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads you exactly where you need to be. I sat on that basement floor for an hour, simply staring at the letter and attempting to process what it meant. My entire life had been a lie, but not the kind of lie that diminishes you, the kind of lie that protects you until you're strong enough to handle the truth. Then I picked up my phone and dialed Marshal Leander Croft. Marshal Leander Croft answered on the second ring, like he'd been sitting by his phone waiting for 35 years. When I identified myself as Thaddeus Pembroke but explained I thought my real name was Thaddeus Volante, there was a long pause, then a deep breath. He told me he'd been waiting for this call since my mother died, asked where I was, and instructed me not to touch anything else, not to talk to anyone, and not to leave that house. He said he'd be there in 4 hours. Marshal Croft turned out to be a tall, gray-haired man in his early 60s who looked like he'd witnessed every kind of human evil imaginable and had never quite gotten used to it. He arrived with 2 other federal agents and spent 6 hours going through everything my mother had left behind, photographing documents, cataloging evidence, and asking me questions about my life in California. He told me my mother was one of the bravest people he ever worked with, that she knew they'd eventually track down her son, so she prepared for this day. The money, the safe combination using my birthday, even hiring those private investigators to watch me in California, she wanted me to find all of this when I needed it most. The complete scope of what had happened to me was even worse than I'd imagined. The Graziano crime family had been systematically hunting down witnesses from my father's murder trial for decades, but they'd gotten smarter about it. Instead of simply killing people, which brought too much federal attention, They'd learn to destroy lives more subtly. They'd find ways to compromise the people closest to their targets, then use those people to create chaos and financial ruin. Marshall Croft explained they'd been working on my case for at least 5 years. They found Isolde through her real estate connections, people who knew the right kind of criminals. They probably approached her as potential clients first, legitimate business that slowly transformed into something else. The investigators my mother had hired had been building their own case during this time, documenting everything. They had recordings of Isolde meeting with people connected to the Graziano organization. They had evidence of money changing hands, falsified documents being created, witnesses being paid to lie about me. The gambling addiction story, the fake bank statements, all of it was their work, Marshall Croft said. They've used the same playbook on 6 other witnesses over the past 15 years. Create financial and legal chaos, destroy the person's credibility, then wait for them to run back to wherever they came from. But there was something the Graziano family hadn't counted on. My mother's death from natural causes 2 years earlier had triggered certain protocols within the Marshal Service. They'd been quietly monitoring the situation, waiting to see if anyone would come looking for the safe house in Toledo. Marshall Croft admitted they'd had surveillance on this neighborhood for 2 years, that they knew if they forced me to come back here, they'd eventually make their move. They'd been documenting everyone who'd shown unusual interest in this address. The most shocking revelation came the next morning. Isolde had been arrested at her Eugene hotel early in the morning, along with 3 men who'd been following her. She'd been cooperating with people she thought were private investigators, helping her secure a better divorce settlement. She had no idea they were connected to organized crime until federal agents explained it to her in an interview room. Marshall Croft told me she'd agreed to testify, that it turned out she was as much a victim in this as I was. They convinced her I was hiding gambling debts and other women. They showed her fake evidence, got her scared and angry, then offered to help her protect the kids and secure her financial future. The hardest phone call I ever made was to Alaric and Seren. They were staying with Isolde's sister in Eugene, confused and scared because their mother had been arrested and no one would tell them why. When I spoke to Alaric, his voice sounded small and young, nothing like the confident teenager I remembered. When Serene got on the phone, she asked if I was really a gambling addict, said their mom had told them I stole money and that's why they had to move. I told them no, that I never gambled and never stole anything, that some very bad people lied about me to hurt our family, but the police caught them. I promised we'd be together again very soon. It took 6 months to untangle everything legally. The evidence my mother's investigators had gathered, combined with Isolde's testimony and the federal case against the Graziano organization, was enough to clear my name completely. The fake gambling records were exposed as forgeries. The witnesses who'd lied about me recanted their statements. My insurance license was reinstated with an official apology from the state board. Isolde and I will never recover what we had. Too much damage was done, too many lies were told, too much trust was broken. But we're working together now to help our kids understand what happened and why. She's in therapy dealing with the guilt of having been manipulated into destroying her own family. I'm in therapy learning how to trust people again, but we got our children back, and that's what matters most. The house in Toledo sold for enough money to purchase a smaller place in California and fund college accounts for both kids. Alaric's back on the basketball team, and his coach says several colleges are still interested despite the disruption to his junior year. Serene's art has gotten more hopeful lately, more colorful, though she still draws many pictures of families that look like they've survived storms. I think about my mother every day, about the sacrifice she made to give me a normal childhood, about the courage it took to testify against murderers and then spend 35 years looking over her shoulder. She saved my life twice, once when I was 12 and again when I was 47, and I never got the chance to thank her for either one. The Graziano case is going to trial next year, and I'll be testifying just like my mother did all those years ago. This time, though, I won't be running afterward. This time we're going to finish what she started. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads you exactly where you need to be. My mother knew that, and she made sure that even from beyond the grave, she could still protect her son.